Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on SEO for charities. I'm your host, Joanne Mark Jones. I'm the content editor here at Charity Digital. Our presenter today is Nick Wyatt. He's our growth marketing executive. So today's plan is that Nick's going to give roughly a 35 to 40-minute presentation, after which Nick and myself will be answering some questions. The reason both of us are answering questions is because Nick mainly specializes in keyword searches, trends, patterns, ads on Google, and so on. So that it's the stuff that exists sort of before and after the creation of content, whereas my expertise are firmly on the writing side, so the actual creation of content. So we thought if it was best that we'd both be available to answer questions depending on, which side they fall. So before we crack on, just a few housekeeping rules. Today's session is being recorded and will be made available later in the week, along with slides and loads of helpful resources. Closed captions are available. You just need to click on the live transcript CC button on the menu bar and select show subtitles. Please use the chat box function to say hello to each other, share any struggles or personal experiences you have with SEO, as well as any tips or advice you might have for others. And as ever, please be aware of connectivity issues, but we should be okay. But let us know if you need anything repeated or anything wasn't clear. And last but not least, please pop your questions in the Q&A section. And remember that you can upvote questions that feel relevant to you. So other people's questions, you can just vote for that. So it's sort of democratic. They'll raise to the top and we can answer those to provide the most value. And that's it in terms of my part in my hosting. But I'll join you for the Q&A section and I'll just pass on to Nick, who has just joined us now.
Hello all, thank you Johan. It's Johan's first webinar today, so everyone be really nice to him.
Thank you, Nick. I'm leaving now.
Yes, so let's start from the beginning. Oh yeah, I guess I'll introduce myself as well. Yeah, I'm Nicholas and I work here at Charity Digital on our growth marketing, and as Johan mentioned, that we work together on a lot of the SEO stuff. I'm more on the ad side of things and the keyword side of things, while Johan's more on the writing side. So hopefully both of our knowledge will be perfect at helping you in the Q&A section at the end. So please get your questions in and we'll make sure that we answer as many as possible. So let's kick this off, and I'm going to start right at the top really, and I'm going to kind of take this as from the assumption that maybe people are at different levels with SEO, but I'm going to try and start from the very beginning and work my way through, and hopefully there'll be something for everyone in there. But let's start at the top really about defining SEO and what it really means. So essentially SEO, which stands also, by the way, for search engine optimization, just for anyone who doesn't know that, but SEO is essentially, and I put a quote here to define it, but is the process of improving the visibility of a website or a web page on a search engine. So that really just means that when someone searches something, you will hopefully appear higher on the list of things on a search engine. Now, the way that this works is that search engines will do something which is called crawling a site, and they'll look for keywords and pieces of information and other different elements that we'll get into later to judge whether that whatever that person has searched is perfect to be pushed up along the rankings, is I guess the way of putting it. So yeah, this word crawl is something that I'm going to refer back to quite a lot throughout the rest of this webinar, because it will be coming up a lot. But on top of that, let's look at why it's so important to focus on SEO. I put a fact here, which is I think was so massive when I read it, which is that the click-through rate of the first position on Google is nearly 20%. That's like nearly 1 in 5 people will click on the first thing over everything else. And if you compare that to sort of other marketing channels, that's a huge number. So it's something that's really good. When you really nail this down, you kind of see such amazing results. And because of that, it's going to bring more users to your site organically. So you're going to have more traffic. And that leads into the next thing here, which is that more that traffic means that you're going to have more brand awareness as well, because you're going to be seen more across the internet. And on top of that, the higher you rank, the more you're going to stand out in a crowd. If you're in a particularly competitive market or you have other people who do similar things to you and such, it will help you stand above them on search engines. But apart from just that side of things, it creates a trustworthy web experience. What I mean by that is that more people are more likely going to trust a page which is higher up on Google than something that's lower down. And on top of that, lots of research has shown it improves your site engagement as well. If something's highly ranked on a search engine, when they visit that, they are more likely to spend more time on that and engage more with that website. So that it's not just about getting more people through the door, it's also getting the right people through the door, and it's about keeping them there too. So that's why I think it's so important that everyone focuses on this and spends some time to really nail down their SEO. So now we know it's important, and now it is. Let's start with the sort of top level of this, which is finding and researching SEO keywords and also reviewing your site to see what improvements can really be made from the get-go. So when you're looking for keywords, everyone's going to have sort of different things they're going to be looking for depending on what you're doing. But a really great place to start is by looking on a site like Google Trends. Now, Google Trends is an analytic measuring tool which will show you essentially the traffic of different terms, and you can compare it to different terms as well, and the frequency that they've been searched in different places in the world at different times. And then you can sort of paint a picture of what you should be using or keeping down as your keywords and using them moving forward when you're creating content for your site. This is so great because you can also get ahead of things in time. So it may be a case of, I mean, this is really obvious, but you start including things about Christmas and the build up to Christmas, because Google Trends will literally show you how much more that's going to be searched as those months start coming in. So sometimes you want to get that in place a few months before, but Google Trends is a really perfect place to try and find these keywords. Now, I think the great thing to do next really is to go onto Google Search Console, which essentially teaches you about the Google algorithms and your website and shows you how you can improve your website. If you compare that to what you've learned from Google Trends, you might be able to see holes within your website of certain keywords that you could start using to fill out certain areas, but also it'll tell you other things about what areas in which your website can improve, whether it be like grammar, speeds and stuff like that. Once again, I think it's really good to compare what you learn from the Google Search Console with those sort of trends to try and fill those holes. But there's other really useful tools that I think you should definitely do. One thing that we do quite a lot is that we'll put our website into an SEO checker, and it'll sort of rank your website and show you how well you're doing on different levels, whether speeds, grammar, images, and word, text, and SEO and such. And it will give you a grade, and then you can sort of work on the different areas that you should be looking at. There's other things you can look at. There's some good keyword tools here, like Moz keyword tool. That's a really good one. Serapeak, I think that's how we pronounce it. That's another really good one. And if you're not really on Google, there's other websites that search engines that have this stuff like Bing. Webmaster Tool is another really good one. I personally use Google AdWords and Google Analytics a lot to find keywords, because with analytics, it will show you a lot of the traffic that's coming to your site and how it's coming to your site. And then sometimes from there, I can look at the articles or stuff in place, and we can double down on the things that we know are doing well to sort of drive more people to our site and also improve our ranking when we get a crawl. Also, AdWords has a keyword planner. Now, this isn't just for ads. You can use that for your SEO as well. And if you put in your site or some key phrases or key terms, it'll give you a list of keywords that people have been searching, the frequency of them, how they've increased or decreased over the last X amount of period. And then also from there, you can sort of build a list of different keywords that you want to use for various different things. And I find that incredibly useful and a great place to find key terms. Now, oh, I missed this. So yeah, the next thing I want to talk about, so if you get a list of keywords, now we're going to have to look at how to optimize the use of them. And I'm going to talk about how we use them before we actually even really get into writing the bulk of the content. So what I mean by this is really looking at the other ways you can use those keywords and other places where they're really important, because the more places you get them in place properly, the better the crawl will be of your site, pick up those key terms and help you with your ranking. So a really good example off the top here is that looking at your post title. It's really good to try and keep at least 2 of your key terms into your post title. So I'm going to give you an example here. If we were writing an article about fundraising with sport and our keywords were sport and fundraising, we were trying to include those in the title. And then from there also the stand first, which also, you know, your subject line or your undertitle, try and get those same keywords in there as well, maybe some other ones that are related, but also making sure that you're not overusing anything or going too egregious with it, because that will hurt you in the rankings as well. Also with your URL, you want to get your keywords in there. I mean, sometimes this will happen naturally, and you'll find if you're writing an article or a blog post, your URL's title matches the title of whatever you're writing, which is really good. But if it's not doing that automatically, and for example, it's giving you a number, that's going to hurt you in the rankings. So making sure you're getting those there as well is really important. Now, throughout whatever you're writing or putting together on your site, the headings that you use for them, making sure that they match perfectly with the key terms you're using or include those key terms can really help once again. So when it does that crawl, it's going to find those words again, and it's going to help with your ranking. And also making sure with that opening paragraph that you're using for whatever you're writing, or the heading for your blog or content, I'm just going to use those examples for everything really, includes a lot of those keywords as well, and match with the keywords that you used before. So it's just kind of doubling down over and over again on picking up on the right key terms that you want to make you appear higher in those searches. And now this is one I think that a lot of people forget, is that using the right image names and alt text on your site is another great way to get yourself in there. So it's a case of when you upload certain images onto your site, make sure you give them the right names, but also the names that include those keywords. And if you have an alt text, try to do the same for them too. And these are just like loads of different ways. If you do all of these, you're going to massively help with your SEO ranking. Okay, so from there, we want to start looking into how we can make the content itself of a higher quality to help support your SEO. And I'm going to kind of split this up into two different segments, which is things that will really help and things that you really want to avoid, and then some different models about how you can make it as good as possible. So if we start with things that make it really good is, and I put this one, stay human. Now, what I mean by this is sometimes I've seen this quite a lot where you get an article which is so clearly for SEO that it's just pushed as many keywords into it as possible, and it reads as if a robot has just been told to write out this with as many keywords as possible. You want to keep it as human as possible, as natural as possible at the right time, and using those keywords at the right time and place. So you might find that you're trying to get a certain, I'll give that example again with the fundraising of sport, but you're putting in those two words every 4 words is actually going to make Google and other search engines quite suspicious of your content and see what you're trying to do. And that's actually going to have detriment on your ranking. So yeah, try to keep whatever you write as human as possible, as natural as possible, while still including those words when you can. Be consistent. This is one thing that Ewan preaches all the time because he's a big advocate of a style guide. And what a style guide essentially is like a guide to how you're going to write across your website so that you have consistency across the entire site, whether that be like grammar, writing style, your tone of voice and such, so that when you do have a crawl of your site and it goes across all the different pages, they will feel very comfortable pushing your website forward because they'll see a consistency across the board. But that's also, you know, as I mentioned here later, staying top of grammar, because if they see poor grammar across your website, they will not enjoy that and it will drop you down the rankings again. Be really clear and concise. This is kind of from an SEO perspective, but also just, I guess, a content perspective, is that getting your message across as easily as possible. It was really good when you're having your crawl across your site, but also it's just really good when you're writing content as well. So make sure you're kind of not using waffle as much as possible is really good and really useful when you're trying to push yourself up the rankings. We'll get into a little bit more about this in the terms of links and such, but make your content shareable and accessible. What I mean by this is making sure that it's as good as it can be so that other people can share it, because when it's seen elsewhere on the internet, it's going to actually help you in your rankings as well. And making sure that you have all the backlinks in place and this will help with repetition online, and also just increase the visibility online, almost creating a web that Google and other search engines will be able to see and make it feel like your content is as trustworthy as possible to be pushed up the rankings. Now, if these are the things you really want to try to avoid, because this will really hurt your SEO ranking if you have a lot of this going on. So the really big one here is 404s and broken links. If a search engine sees that you're linking out to things that are broken or 404, or your website just has lots of 404 broken links on it already, it's actually going to be at a detriment to your ranking online. So you really want to take the time to be looking through this, checking your 404s and those broken links, and making sure that you don't have too many of them. Also making sure that the links that you have in your article don't lead to these places, because it's just not going to work in your favor and it's going to make them suspicious and they'll penalize you for having them. Now, this one's a little bit up for debate, the too short question, because generally speaking, longer articles or more text as a whole across your site will help you rank higher, because it gives more text for Google and other search engines to crawl through and read. But generally speaking, try to include more. I know it's one of those things, if you put your website through one of those SEO checkers, a lot of the time they'll actually come back. If you don't write blogs and if you don't write articles and such, you'll actually tell you that you just don't have enough text on your website for them to push you up in the rankings. So trying to make sure that you're including as much text as possible without it being waffly, as I've mentioned before. So it's concise, but it's useful, is really important. Now, duplicate content. It will raise suspicion on search engines if they see the exact same content living multiple times across your site. So this could be a case of, a good example of where I've seen this is that some websites will have the exact same article republished every year, but the old one lives there still. That will raise suspicion and they won't like that. So sometimes it's a much better thing to do is to update it, bring it forward rather than completely duplicating it. Or if you're writing the same thing over and over again, it's just not going to help. You want to keep things fresh as much as possible so that the search engines will be happy. I speak about the search engines like they're people, a person or someone who's out there reading everything. Unfocused keywords. What I mean by this is essentially well, I'll give the example again about fundraising with sports. But if you were writing something and then you started using loads of different keywords to something completely different, essentially, if you started writing something which had nothing to do with that title, you could actually start driving the wrong traffic to your article, start ranking for the wrong reasons, but also it might appear as quite suspicious to the search engines. So try and keep everything as in theme with what you're doing and what your sort of SEO goal is and what you're pushing out as much as possible, because you want everything to feed up to what you're doing rather than sort of spreading it out in different areas. So yeah, keep all your keywords as focused as possible. Now, here's a really good concept that you can use to really make your content or anything that you write on site as good as possible. And it's the E concept, which basically stands for expertise, authoritativeness. I really hope I said that. I think I did, but it's just so big of a word, it scares me. And trustworthiness. So what this essentially means is some of these they kind of build into each other, and there's a little bit of overlap. But starting from the top here, expertise is sort of demonstrating a high level of knowledge and skill in a particular field. What I mean by that is that when it reads you, when the crawl happens to your site, you can clearly see what you're talking about. You know what you're talking about, and you're not sort of reading off bad information, or it's just coming off as it's not informative and it's not spot on what you're talking about. That's really good, and you should always aim to keep it this way. Authoritativeness is the idea that it will see if traffic's coming to your site from people who are similar to you or have similar expertise, and this will actually help you because as it says here, it will sort of see you as an authority because it knows that other people trust you and such, and that they'll push you up the rankings once again. And trustworthiness, which is kind of very similar to the last two, but in a different ways. That the idea of making sure that your website feels legitimate, feels transparent and accurate. And this will make sure that they can see that everything you're putting on your site is actually correct, and you're not lying about anything, or things you're saying aren't quite right. And this will just once again help with the trustworthiness of your site and help it go up in the rankings as well. Right, I wanted to talk about hyperlinks as a whole, because we've sort of gone through the idea of getting keywords, where you put them, writing the content. Oh, pull my earphone out. But yeah, hyperlinks are really important because these are one of those things I think people forget about lots, and they can have such a huge impact on how you rank on SEO. So the first thing I'm going to look at here really is the difference between article links and backlinks. So when I talk about article links, I'm talking about like hyperlinks that you have on your site, which gives readers further information on subject internally, externally. So it could be a case of, I'll use that example again, fundraising sport, that we have a link in that article or that section of the website which links to fundraising with colleagues and such like that, that it keeps people moving and once again kind of expands this web. But also externally, it could be a case that you're quoting a fact somewhere and you have it referenced right there, so it leads over to a place elsewhere on the web that kind of confirms what you've been saying and such. Now, backlinks is kind of the opposite of that. It's the sort of referral back to your site and how people are using their links that are linking back to you in various different ways around the internet. So key thing here really is to use your article links really wisely, and you can really look at it in this three sort of step ways, that using authority, which essentially means using links to sites if they're external and even internally for that matter, I guess, that are respectable sites. You could look at there are tools like this, like Website Authority Checker, and if you put in a site, it'll tell you if it's a respectable site. It could be that all the information you've read off here is really perfect, but it's not a very respectable site and such. So you really want to check that before linking out to them. Also making sure that it's relevant. You don't want to be putting loads and loads of links in there just for the sake of expanding your web, which have nothing to do with the subject matter or nothing to do with what you're writing about or what the page of your website is. It's just a link for the sake of a link, and that'll actually have a detriment to where you sit on the SEO ranking as well. So make sure, like I said, make sure it's always in the context of what you're doing on that page and it's always relevant. Now, trust is very similar to authority in this, in the sense that make sure you're only sending people to sites that can be trustworthy. What I mean by that difference is not just being respectable, but that the information that's on those pages is correct and that they're trustworthy. Because if you sort of put these all together, you'll be linking to places that make Google and other search engines feel very comfortable, and once again, will feel happy to push you up those rankings. Now, with backlinks, the first thing you really want to do is make sure on your own site is that you're fixing all your broken links. So what I mean by that is, if you've got lots of 404s and you've got links elsewhere on the internet on other people's sites which don't actually exist anymore, but it brings you to your site and it 404s, it's not going to be good, and it's going to be detriment to you once again. So one way to go about this is just to check all your 404s on the back end of your website, see if you can fix them, lots of them, if you can redirect them to the most relevant place, and always make sure it is relevant, because if you push a 404 which was meant to go to a donations page to a page about you, for example, instead of a donations page, that will detriment again as well, because they'll see that you're pushing it to something which isn't what it used to be, or isn't quite in line with where it should be going. So make sure it's always relevant to where that 404 used to be going. But also be careful when you're changing articles or anything on your website with the URL. If that changes, you could find out that someone had written about a particular page on your site elsewhere, and you've just changed that link. So that's now going to 404 and not be found as a link. So if you do change your URLs, make sure that you're always telling your site to redirect them to the new page as much as possible. So you just avoid this entirely. Now, another thing here to help with this is just reach out to people so that you can get more of your content elsewhere. You know, you can email journalists, writers, others in the sectors. I find the charity sector to be incredibly supportive of one another. So it could be that you just reach out to people and hope that they can include your content on theirs, and making sure it kind of goes back to, if your content or whatever you're doing is really good and has support in other fields, hopefully this will sort of start happening naturally. But yeah, taking the time to reach out to people and push that to happen is a really good thing. And that really flows into the next point I made here, which is help others. I was mentioned earlier about having hyperlinks to external places. If you're doing the same for other people, it's just adding to this web of network that you're kind of creating back and forth between two sites. The search engines really enjoy that. And, you know, you're also hoping on the back end, if you help someone and put links on your site which are relevant to you, they will do the same for you. So it's, you know, everybody's helping each other out, and it'll really help everyone move forward. So make your site great again. Another thing that you really need to think about is how accessible and useful your website is outside of the content. I'm going to talk about this in two very important ways, basically being in your load times. They're really important, and how mobile friendly everything is as well, because these are two things that they can actually search your website for as well, and they're going to judge it on when they push you through the rankings. And if they are not great, you're going to struggle even if you have the best content in the world with the best keywords as perfectly mapped out as possible. So if we start with this, the idea of you've got to make your pages as fast as possible, because it's going to be one of the key things that they do when they're crawling your site. If the crawl is taking a really long time because your site was really slow, it's not going to push you up on the rankings. It sometimes might, well, if it's really slow, really going to damage you, because you know how quickly Google operates when putting through suggestions. So you do not want that to be happening. So essentially, there's a few ways you can go about doing this. One thing is use a tool like Page Speed Insights. That will tell you how fast your site is and areas that you can improve. But the things when you're creating content for your site, you should be really looking at is that using compressed images and text files so you don't overload your site. I think with images and text you have to find this perfect balance between quality and size, because if you have the most detailed high-res huge image on one of your pages, it's going to take a really long time to load, and that's going to want to get put down your loading times, and that's not going to help anything. So you need, like I said, find the balance between where it's as good a quality as possible, but also making sure that your page speeds are good. And you can do this in various different ways, because there's different types of image files that the search engines will really like. But JPEG, I think that's a pretty common one that people are probably quite familiar with, but that's a good image place to start, because it's one that a lot of search engines will be very familiar with, and they will help you. It won't cause detriment to you. If you start using slightly more out there image formats, you might find that it has detriment to your speeds, and also has a detriment to your ranking on SEO. Also, another thing, make sure you're enabling browser cache. Not only will this just make your site quicker for your returning users and people can come to your site, but all of the search engines will see this, they'll like it, and they'll go, yes, good. That makes this website quicker, and it helps you once again push you up on the ranking. And I say this is quite broad, it's a broad thing to say, but remove any unnecessary media. If you have sort of plugins or videos or other images on your website which are kind of not needed, or they're not really adding anything, it's actually just better to remove them than have them there, because it's just going to slow down your site. If it's not adding any value, just get rid of it. Make it as concise as possible. You only really want the key things on your site as a whole. So it's not just to put everything there and hope for the best, because yeah, once again, this will increase your speeds and it will increase your ranking on the SEO. So yeah, as I mentioned before, another really key thing here is making sure that your site is as friendly for mobile as possible. More than 50% of traffic at the moment comes from mobile, so you know this is really important, and you need to make sure that your website supports mobile as much as possible. I think I kind of mentioned this here, and it's going to be very different for whatever website you use, but making sure that your site that you're using or whatever website provider you're using is equipped with the tools to adjust to mobile. There's loads of ways you can see this quite easily. If you go into Google settings, there is a mode which literally shows you different devices, and you can see exactly how your website looks on a different device. And it's really useful because that could be laptops, specifically sized screens, phones, different types of phones. That's a really good thing that you can look up to see exactly how well your website is adjusting to them already. But also, yeah, as I mentioned, making sure that the website provider you're using has that facility in place. I've seen a lot of websites on a computer that look great. And I think sometimes some people forget about mobile because you've basically designed the website on a desktop already, but you have to make sure that everything is ready for mobile as well, because so much traffic that you get is going to go through that. And if the search engines see that you're not catering to that crowd, they won't be happy again. And then, yeah, the key things here really is like looking at your text, looking at your fonts, how do they translate to different devices, and are they readable on every device? Make sure you have that all in place on the back end of your site. Have full support of all image sizes and dimensions for different devices. What I mean here is that a banner on a website will look fantastic on a certain thin dimensions that fit the screen perfectly. But if you take that exact same image and translate it to a mobile phone, it won't look like this long thing because of the size of the phone. It will look very small. You might not be able to read it. So you're not really optimizing for mobile. So not only is that a detriment to all your mobile users, but once again, this is something that search engines are going to pick up on, see that you're not catering to this crowds, and they're not going to be happy again. And it's not going to help you with your SEO. So making sure that when you upload these, you have a different range of sizes that your website can use and adjust to the different users that they have when they see that someone's coming from a mobile or an iPad or a desktop. This is just one that's just, I think, A, they like to see it, but B, it's just very useful for users. Making sure when you're using clickable links in text or something or next to each other is that they're nicely spaced out. And what I mean by that is that if you go to a site like this, or for example, just this slides, I can click on each one of these individual slides very easily on a desktop. But if it was on a mobile, you might hit the wrong thing. It's a detriment just to your users because they might get clicked on the wrong thing and they might go elsewhere. But also, it's just a bit bunched up as well. And they won't like that when they sort of scroll you through your website. So yeah, no, I realized that I glanced over quite a lot of things that were not glanced over, but I ran through things quite quickly. So if you've got lots of questions, let me and you and help you, and we'll try to answer as many of these as possible as we move forward. So yeah, please, Johan, return to me.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, quite a lot of questions. Thanks everyone for submitting. There's quite a lot that we can go through quite quickly, and we don't know all the answers. It's worth having that caveat. There's one thing, we don't know all the answers, but the other is that Google, the algorithm is constantly changing, that those updates, and you're not given transparency into what happens. So there's a debate in the SEO community about whether SEO is a art or a science. And it is a science in theory because there are literal, there's a whole playbook essentially, but it's an art in the sense that we're actually not privy to those rules and the rules that are running it. So it's sort of guesswork at times, but it's also just trying to figure out, and you can do enough research and there's enough data to show us sort of how these things work, but because they're constantly updating, that can make some create some issues. The first question was from Helen, and it's what is the difference between a broken link and a 404? Well, a 404, I'll take that one, Nick. A broken link is a 404 is a type of broken link, and it's the most relevant one for SEO content. So you've got 400, which is a bad request. You've got bad host, bad URL, various other forms of broken links. But 404 is, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with, is when you go to a website that says page not found. It happens on Charity Digital. We have to constantly monitor it and fix those broken links. And it's really, Nick talked about and the trust and authority. It's really detrimental if you have loads of broken links to your website. So, it's always worth paying attention to those. But yeah, the simple answer is they are 404 is a type of broken link. It is the most important one and the one you should pay attention to the most. I'll move on if that's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah. First webinar. How can you check your backlinks?
I don't mind talking on this one, but yeah, a good way to really start with this is if you check Google Analytics, because you can see all your referrals on there and it can show you exactly, if your website yourself is not telling you where people are coming from, Google Analytics is a good place to start because it'll start showing you exactly the different websites and exactly the specific pages that people are coming from. And then you can go and review each one of those, have a look at where you've been linked to, because sometimes it's really good actually to check this for the sake of you don't want to be backlinked from somewhere bad as well. So it could be a case of you go to those people and you say, I mean, politely, if you could, just say, no, please don't put me in your site. But yeah, if you want to see where everyone's coming from, I think Google GA is the best place to start.
Yeah, and there's also, just to add, there's Moz and Ahrefs and SEM. There's these quite big companies that do free and paid for versions that really dig deep into this. So that they're called a backlink checker. You can actually, get a free version of with some sites, and a paid for version for bigger charities or charities with more resources might be worth it. But backlinks, one thing just to mention on backlinks is if you write really good content that people engage with, you will naturally get backlinks. There's this theory that you need to go out and find people who will backlink to your site and engage in this massive PR campaign. If your content's good, people naturally backlink it to. So we've seen that with our site. We don't go out and ask anyone, well, typically don't go out and ask everyone to backlink to our content, but the best written content on the site, that's the one that gets backlinks. So that's worth remembering, I think. The next is anonymous attendee, a strange name. I work for a small charity with only 2 comms people. Is it worth trying to get a Google ad grant? Nick,
yeah. So I definitely think it's working in Google ad grant. Even if it's just a case of you use the Google ad grant as a place to get to know Google AdWords. Like I know that I've talked to quite a lot of different charities who use this, and a lot of people find that they use it as almost like their grant to learn the platform. So that, on top of the fact that if you haven't got the budget for it, it's a fantastic place to start and it's going to help you out immediately. But as I mentioned, on top of that, it's just really, especially with small teams who potentially may not be very versed with using AdWords, it's an amazing way to give you a budget to essentially learn the different platform, learn what works for your charity and what can help it. I mean, use other resources online as well to help you along the way. Don't just go in blindly. Google have their own support network. I don't think they're brilliant, but they will help you out the gate. But yeah, go to YouTube. But yeah, just to answer back to it, yes, I definitely think it's definitely worth getting a Google ad grant.
Yeah, and also Charity Digital has lots of information about. So
we do, and I think we can help charities get them as well. I think
we can help charities get them. So I think we'll add loads of information about Google ad grants in the resources after this, and we'll have a few articles that should help. So hopefully that'll do that. Polly had video or moving photos on the front page are very attractive, but is there a price to pay in terms of SEO? I'll take that. Yes, is the simple answer. If you have, we've seen it with our articles where we have podcasts and webinars and videos on the same topic, stuff like fundraising. We've actually got all this information that we all want to hyperlink and move into and create a perfect user experience for people coming onto our site. So if you consume content through, you want to listen to content or you want to view content, you don't have to read it, or vice versa. And we sort of struggled to understand why these weren't ranking as highly, because we were giving everyone everything. And that's the point, is that giving everyone everything is not always a good thing. Stuff like a long webinar, I used to put webinars on the top of pages, and I still do on occasion when I'm not too concerned about ranking, but that's an hour YouTube video that is on this one web page, and the web page then suffers because load time suffers. So images are usually fine, but you can overload images and that will also do that, and also doesn't make for the best user experience. A lot of people on web pages do just want to read them. So yeah, be cautious. It's a trade-off. If you think the imagery and the attractiveness of the imagery is worth it, but it will have an impact on SEO. And that, as Nick said, compression is your friend. So always compress wherever you can. Slightly tougher with video, but certainly with images you can compress really well. So
I think one thing to mention on this as well, even in just terms outside of SEO, that I've seen some really attractive websites who have gone for tons of photos and tons of videos, which are almost unusable because they're just filled to the brim with fancy stuff. I think I'm not going to throw them under the bus, but I went onto a band's page the other day and I couldn't even use it because it was so fancy and full of videos that it wouldn't even load properly with a good internet source as well. So yeah, like as you made, it's definitely striking a balance between use and attractiveness.
Yeah, and mobile, remember, as well. If you're doing these things, people put videos and images all over the place on their websites, and then they go, this looks great on the desktop, and they don't check the mobile. I think we've actually been we've done that in the past where we're not as conscious of mobile, so we need to improve that at Charity Digital. Let's move on. Cynthia, with regards to trustworthiness, how can Google tell if your content is accurate? I can lead with this one, Nick. They can't. Is the short answer. So basically with trustworthiness, they use all the things that Nick was talking about, the good and the bad, but they don't actually have someone they do have a pool of people, but articles will not get read to based on the trustworthiness. An example is reputable sources on news sources that many of us may disagree with wholeheartedly. An example would be Fox News, for example. Some people think they bend the truth a little bit. I'm going to stay sort of neutral here. They would be seen as maybe not particularly accurate. However, they are deemed accurate because they're trustworthy in that opinion. So Google does base it entirely on the trustworthiness of your site, the reputation, i.e. how often it's engaged in, and then various other ranking, the engagement itself as well. Also stuff like grammar and punctuation and the way you write. I mean, it's a massive thing for me, but one thing I do when I write articles is I get them perfect, and every sentence should be substantiated. So substantiation with reputable hyperlinks would also increase your deemed accuracy, as it were. But in terms of actually trustworthiness, Google can't tell if it's accurate other than these outside sort of determinations.
I mean, I think to sum up exactly what you're saying there is they're not looking at it from a trustworthy sense of, you said 21% when actually it's 25%. They're looking at it as if it feels that way in terms of how it's written and such and how it's presented. As you mentioned, like Fox feels that way, even if yes.
I hope that helped. I'm sorry it can't be sort of expanded more, but we can have a look at that in a bit more detail. Does media loaded on site but not used on any of the web pages still slow down the site? I don't think so, is the answer that I would say. Basically, the web page is judged as the web page. So if there's nothing loaded onto the web page won't be punished. I would say that there's a lot of, one problem we have at Charity Digital, we actually have a ton of content that actually isn't and uploaded to various places that actually isn't the best content. Admittedly, we've improved it vastly in recent years, but that content actually brings down some of our new content. So it's a question that we have to get. So if you have loads of content loaded to the site, loads of content in the back end, loads of content that isn't particularly useful and it's old and outdated, it might be worth having a bit of a clear out. That would be my advice there. But ultimately, to answer the question bluntly, if it's loaded to the site but not on a web page, it's not going to punish the web page. Cool. Next question. I hope this is all right, just going through them quickly. Is there a site we can go to view how our site looks on different devices?
Yeah, so Google can actually do this, and I'm kicking myself because I know how to do it, but I can't give instructions here without doing it myself. But I'm pretty sure if you go into, there's definitely F key that you can press when you're on Google, and literally it'll put up the code on the right hand side, and then it'll put up your site, and at the top of that site it will literally tell you can choose what device. It's actually really brilliant. Like, it's not even just like mobile, website, iPad. It can literally be as minute as on a Galaxy S11, on an iPhone Pro 11. It will literally, you can choose different ones. But if you do a quick Google search, it'll tell you the exact commands that you need to do it. But yeah, you don't have to go to a particular site. Google will do it for you on any site. You can look at your own site. You can look at any different site actually and view it from a different device through the web browser on a desktop.
Oh wow, I did not know that. I should know that. What Harriet asked, what is the most important statistic to look at in Google Search Console to see how SEO is improving? Well, I think for me, if I'm going to talk about rankings, I would say the engagement factors you generally want to tackle is time on site, total referring domains, stuff like that. Is that Google Search Console? Do you know, Nick?
Yeah, I think so. It's one of those things that I'm now looking at all the times I've reviewed our website, and I'm thinking I look at a very different way about the different things like backlinks and imagery and text and how they're reviewed in the total review. Like, I'm trying to think of the different metrics that we can really be looking at, but
important metrics are a bounce rate is important. It's not maybe as important as it's previously been. Exit rate. If people are coming on your website, on your web page, and that's the page they leave from, that's important. Scroll depth is quite important because that means they've gone down your site and engaged. Time on site would also be important. One thing about Google algorithms we do know is that they do base everything on certain criteria, essentially. And it's not just how well your keywords are doing and so on and so forth. That's one part of it. Another part of it is the engagement once on the website. So you might have the best keyword optimization and so on that we've ever seen. And then you get to that point that someone goes onto your website because they see you're ranking high, and then they realize that they don't like the writing, they don't like the grammar, they don't like the way it's presented, they don't like the look, the feel, whatever it is, and they go off it. Your site will not rank high on Google. It's punished for that. So I think look at the I mean, I don't know if you have anything to add, but yeah, the main ones I would say are the ones that basically show how long someone has stayed on your site. I think clicked stuff is a good example. Bounce rate is a good example. Exit rate is a good example. Anything to add, Nick?
Well, yeah, no, I'm trying to think if there are specific ones on Google Search Console, and they a lot of that information does feed back from GA anyway. But yeah, I think it's just to do with page experience and stuff like that. But I'll put some more things down on exactly the ones I think are the best on that, and I'll answer that question later.
Cool. Yeah. So anonymous attendee again. Do you have a Google Ad Grants webinar for beginners? Yes, is the short. It's not for beginners, but it is. I think we have a webinar. If again, I said I will put all the resources down there. So yeah, we'll get that to you all in due course.
I think do we have an article on a webinar? If we don't, then we will. Like, that's a really good idea.
We can do one.
But I know you've definitely made articles about it, and well, so you, and if not, I'll do a webinar on it at some point. But
yeah,
maybe.
I mean, it is a really important thing, and it's great. But I mean, the web ultimately it's not the most complex thing in the world as well. So you can work it out through the articles, and they should be quite helpful resources. But if a webinar is something that people think would help, let us know, and we'll definitely put one together. We're always sort of on the lookout to sort of help whatever people need, really. We'll move on from that. Lisa, what's the average click rate for, say, 5 or 6 on the first page of Google? Yes. So Nick, so 20% is 1. Sorry, do you want to go with that?
Yeah, no. So that was based on a study that was done, I think last year. It was on the first 1,000 people to look at a page. I'm not really sure what it says on the first 5 or 6, because I guess that's part of it. But I'll link out to that after this, where people can read that study that was done, because there was lots of great stuff that was added in there. But yeah, that was based off 1,000 people. I
would say that based on research, that's a disputed number, 20%. No offense, Nick, but ultimately they're all more than that. So first would get, I had a quick look at while Nick was presenting, and one site says as much as 40% for the first one. And to give you some context, that site also says for 5 or 6 you would be looking at 4% or 5%. So you're saying essentially, if you're ranking first, you're looking at 40, up to 40, between 20 and 40, let's say. And second, you're looking at up to 20. And by the time you get to 5 or 6, it is really, really dropping. An interesting point about this as well is ads on paid for ads don't actually rank as high as organic. So if the best scenario isn't to pay for and get good pay per click, Nick, you might have some thoughts on this. The best scenario is actually not to pay for it and you to rank highly. Yeah, I'll let Nick.
Well, I think it depends on your strategy. I know that one thing that we've been discussing lately is and it's something I should have mentioned in the presentation, but totally I forgot, was that the idea that SEO takes time. So, it can take a few months to really get into circulation. And I know the one thing we've discussed is the idea of if you do have the budget there, is putting that in place. It won't help you with SEO in the long run, because they are two very separate things. But if you want to rank high of something before it's got into the SEO thing, it might be a good idea to sort of look at that budgeting, push a little bit of budget into it, whatever you're pushing forward, if you're really proud of it. So that has an ad on top of Google rather than the SEO, and then later down the line really try and rely on your SEO rather than the paid advertisement. If that kind of answers the question, I'm trying to find it.
I think it's a really important point as well. And it deals with another question, which we'll move on to. But one thing is, if you do have a good paid advertisement, pay per click, and it's really successful, it will have success that's reverberates. One thing Nick talked about in his presentation is, people come with backlinks to sites. It's almost like self-fulfilling. If you have good content that people are clicking on, even if you pay for it and they engage in it, they'll start backlinking. Then you'll start going up the ranks because you've got the support of the backlink. It increases trustworthiness, authority. And so you go up the ranks and then more people backlink. It's self-fulfilling and self-perpetuating.
Yeah. I guess, you're right in that sense, because I think I said that they're very separate, which they are to a point, but you're right in the sense that once they have actually come through and they're on your site, you're going to have positive influence there. Yeah.
And so, I mean, this leads to Rich's question, which is just about to put our new website live. Any advice on maintaining, ranking or boosting SEO on a brand new site? A few things I'd probably caveat, if that's okay, Nick. I would say a site is not going to rank immediately, so be aware of that. It's going to take some time to get live, and then ultimately I would say a few things. Make sure the content, and this is a personal opinion, I would say, just to caveat, but I make sure the content, all the content you produce is very high quality to begin with, because you actually have what's one thing that we don't have, for example, is a blank slate. You've got something to build and build from the beginning, making sure everything's high quality. So SEO optimize, using a lot of the tips that that Nick mentioned, use those and from the very beginning. And then if you're getting live, you may want to engage with your first website, your first new website. You might want to engage in some PR, some campaigns, some networking to boost that a little bit, ask for some backlinks and get it going. And it will probably take about 6 months for you to start really seeing that come through. But if people see it as a reputable site and you get a bit of that sort of acknowledgement and validation from your community and from the charity community, you will likely see a massive a boost, and then you'll see your ranking, and then you need to boost it further. So really, I'd say use a lot of the tips Nick has suggested, but really you've got a great opportunity when you're starting a new website to make sure that every piece of content you have is brilliant, really, and SEO optimized.
I think another point I really add here is when you're trying to maintain that ranking, is just take the time to review your site as much as possible, see where you could possibly be slipping, because things like 404s and stuff like that we mentioned, if you don't check up on those, then you're not going to be maintaining your ranking as well. So it's sort of building a process in place that you're making sure you keep reviewing your site, keep checking up on all these different areas. And also one thing I know that we basically, well, you do, is that you sort of schedule out specific SEO type pieces, don't you? That is kind of built into the plan, so you're maintaining that as you move on and forwards. So yeah, I think there's an extra point to that again.
Nathaniel asked, we are currently reviewing the structure of our website, mapping our existing support pages. We have a recommendation of a new structure to help improve our SEO, but what are your thoughts for which we should prioritize here? User experience or SEO? Do you want to start, or do you want me to?
Well, I guess the difficulty with a question like this is that I think that it's going to be it depends.
Yeah.
It depends on the purpose of your site, I think. If it's a case of, I don't know, if you're trying to drive new users to it, if you really need more users than SEO more, but if it's a case of you're supporting people and it's a service delivery type website, your user experience is going to be far more important than SEO. So I think it's really judging what the purpose of your site is, what you really need it to do. And if it's good, you need to drive traffic, you need more people, then SEO is the best thing you should be focusing on. But if it's a case of you need your site to be as supportive as possible, UX is important. But I think really that really just comes down to making a balance between the two. And is make sure that it's just a really good website that does include the relevant things that you need for SEO, which I think you can balance out quite well if you take the time to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree to a degree. I would say that user experience and SEO go hand in hand. So in terms of the reliability, authority of your website, if you've got a website with poor user experience, you're just not going to be ranking very highly on SEO, especially if you're, I mean, whenever we say ranking, we do have to differentiate between local SEO, sorry, a plane is going above, local SEO and organic SEO. So if your charity deals with a very local issue, for example, if it's looking after cat adoption in Newcastle, for example, for the first thing that came in my head, then you're probably going to rank quite highly anyway. So you don't really need to focus too much on that particular search, you know, because if someone searches cat adoption in Newcastle, you're likely to come up, as long as you have some reputation. So I'd say then you definitely focus on user experience. But yeah, the two are interconnected. So with a good user experience, you are going to increase your reliability, your authority, your trust. And with a bad user experience, SEO, you can do all the SEO in the world, but people won't stay on your site. And that means that all the optimization means nothing, because if people leave your site, registers that your site is not doing its job, and then you get punished for it. I always use the word punished. I think that's too
penalized.
Penalized. You do get penalized. So that this, in my opinion, I would focus on user experience with an eye to SEO. But without good user experience, SEO isn't actually gonna do too much. If that's okay.
I don't know if it's okay. You disagreed with me. It's unbelievable. We basically have the same point, I think, though, really. Karen.
Yeah, sorry, our pages are made using WordPress components. For design reasons, sometimes we don't have any writing in the top component, and therefore the readability is red. Is this bad for SEO? Do you know much about that, Nick?
I don't know too much about that, but don't worry. We'll any questions that we can't ask right now, we'll go back and do a little bit of research for, and we'll be able to get you an answer for them. Go back or you can drop one of us an email, and we'll be able to give you some more visibility on that. But off the top of my head, I don't actually know on that one.
No, and I would say the same for some of these other questions. We can put together a small article, and I'll just tackle basically any of the other questions. I can write a bit about that. It might depend on a little bit more research from us, if that's okay. Do embedded videos from YouTube slow down load times? Yes. An example is we had a SEO optimized piece of content that was doing really well. There's obviously this conflict in charities because you actually want to engage in more of your content, so it's a good for user experience and so on and so forth. So you've come to see fundraising ideas, and we have more content on fundraising ideas, and this is a real life example. And we have a video that we created, we spent some money on creating, and so we really want to drive people to that video. But we had this very highly ranking SEO piece on fundraising ideas, and then we added the video, and the video just slowed it down. And what that means is it slowed down your page times, as Nick has mentioned. That leads to essentially lower rankings. So in the end, we actually took it off. And just went back.
I want to mention one thing on this also, that this is something I learned very recently. But if you have the ability to not embed but actually upload directly, that will actually be better, because YouTube is not your friend when you embed, because YouTube, when you're watching a video, will try and actually take the user from your site to YouTube. And it's why if you embed videos, you'll see things where they'll have lots of different suggested videos, or view this on YouTube and such. So if you have the option to put it natively on your website, I would do that over embedding, because YouTube has a tendency to try and take you away from your website.
Yeah, definitely. YouTube can be sneaky.
It is sneaky.
We'll go to the cornerstone content for Helen. Cornerstone content, as I understand it, is sort of like the core content that pulls a lot of people to your site. I'm not sure if that's exactly right. But I think I think with SEO content, when you have a lot of it and the ranking is super important, you need to actually repurpose a lot of this stuff. You need to keep it up to date. You need to revise it. That in itself is a massive job. It's one that we really struggle with because of capacity. So I'd say it is so important, because it essentially allows you to keep these things up there, and actually neglecting those cornerstone pieces of content will lead to, it's a massive reduction in traffic, because I don't know how other people experience it, but our SEO, we have certain SEO articles that we've really worked on hard. They have 5,000 words. We optimize them with keywords, hyperlinks. We do everything possible, compress every possible media, and we see that as cornerstone content, the stuff that really pulls people. We neglect those pieces, our traffic will dive quite massively. So we dedicate a lot of time to that. So I would say, focus on find your key pieces of content and really focus on them, I'd say. Anything to add, Nick?
No. You said it beautifully.
I hope that was what was meant by that. And sorry.
I think so.
Yeah, I think it was. If not, again, we're always open to any further queries, and just chase us up. The fundraising videos, I've seen someone on the chat. Yeah, the fundraising video is now, we actually, sorry if that's all right to deviate quickly.
Yeah, go on.
The fundraising videos are now, we actually did have a place for videos on the site. This is about user experience, and recently we put drop downs that actually help people navigate the site in a way. Before, I'm sure some people who are familiar with Charity Digital might have noticed it was sometimes difficult to find what exactly you wanted, but now we've got videos in one select place, so that really helps us with essentially it helps the user experience, because if you come for a video, you can go there. But we would love to have it on that site. But we talked a lot here about trade-offs, and so much of SEO is a trade-off. And in that instance, we figured, yes, it slowed down our site, it reduces our rankings, but we'd rather have more value and more people in the charity sector see it. I'll ask the next question. Do you know if keywords in Google's reviews help SEO?
Yeah, no, so I've read this question. I was thinking about this, and it depends what you're asking here. If you're asking if people review your charity, if they use keywords, that's a little bit out of your control. But B, I don't think from an SEO perspective it has that much of an impact. What I do think is, as a visibility perspective, it is. Because if you're allowed to be Google reviewed, then you're going to appear higher up because there'll be that option for Google because it has that information already on their site. And I mean, yeah, you're going to have more people see you because there's a different avenue for you there. It's the same with if you're on Google Maps and such. It just kind of ties all things together. Same with like Wikipedia and such. But in the terms of what people write in your reviews of you keywords, if that's what that means, I don't think so, but I just think in terms of visibility, it is good to have Google reviews and try and maintain it as well, because it's actually going to be massively detrimental if you get Google reviews and they're really low, because no one's going to click on your site if you've got 1 out of 5 next to your name, really. So yeah, if you judge as you will, see where you fit.
Cool, thanks, Nick. Can you recommend a good inclusivity toolbar for users with disabilities, and does it help SEO?
Now, I don't have anything to hand, and it's one of those things I think we also can go back and find something for you there. Yeah. But I think inclusivity definitely helps with SEO, because I've mentioned that with the sense of alt text and things like that. It kind of gives you an opportunity to get those keywords in the different places once again, which is obviously very useful. But as making sure that your website is as accessible as possible to more people goes back to what Johan was saying earlier about user experience. Is you're going to have a better user experience if it's inclusive as possible. So yeah, we'll go out and we'll try and find something that will be a really good useful toolbar for that. But yeah, I think it definitely helps.
Yeah, I echo that. I think a lot inclusivity, and beyond that, inclusivity is always good for people on your site. So whatever you can do in that sense, and it sometimes it also does come down to doing what you can achieve within the resources and capacity you have. A specific question from Jessica, but any tips for SEO for area based? We support blind and sight impaired people across West Sussex. For this sort of direct search, we are first click. But if you were to search for a town, e.g. Horsham, our website isn't first. It is other areas then linking to us instead. How do we ensure we are first so that they are clicking straight to us? Okay. Yeah, actually, really interesting question. And actually tons you could probably do. One, I would assume your West Sussex is somehow built into the charity. I would assume, just based on the fact that that is coming top on the first clicks. What I would do is, for example, if you're a reputable site because you're already ranking highly on there, you could have web pages that are individual for those different areas. That would then create, and that's one idea, Nick. I'm sure you have others.
Yeah, I was going to say the same.
Yeah, you create web pages, so it's basically a landing page. So they go to those, and you are offering support in those places. Localized SEO is it's a kind of different ball game for, like, if you're doing, when we've talked a lot about like sort of organic SEO here, like the big ticket items, the local ones, this is going to sound self-fulfilling, but local ones, you have to localize them. So make them as relevant to those areas as possible, using key terms that people in those areas may search. So if it's Horsham, maybe there's surrounding communities that they might also be interested in if they have to search beyond that direct area, so include those keywords, but then really, and don't stuff keywords because you get punished for that, but include Horsham in that article, in the URL, in the title, and have that as a landing page, and then you should rank highly.
Yeah.
Any other tips?
I mean, I was going to, basically echo what you said about there's going to be so many towns in West Sussex, but I don't know, maybe about the area we cover with a list of towns could be something, because you're kind of getting those towns and words into your site there, which could help. But yeah, I think that's interesting, because I feel like Google is smart enough that if someone put a town in West Sussex, they should pick that up sometimes, because I know that if I search particular areas, they'll show me certain things like that. But I don't know. It might be because they found a solution for this, though.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. So you can get it right one month, and next month you find you're not quite sure why that's happening, or you're going down. But I would say they are specific. And if you do, I mean, you may have already tried this, and sorry if that's the case and we're not answering it perfectly, but I would say individual websites, they don't have to be too big, but can include a bit of local information and anything that's specific to that area that you can. Obviously, it has to be retained relevant. Don't just tell the history of Horsham, but, containing relevant information, and then hopefully you'll get a landing page that will rank. And sometimes, and this is a broad point for it, sometimes you can't rank higher than other people because you just don't offer what they offer, and that may be the case too. And so, I mean, with us, we work really hard at SEO to get things right, and sometimes I write I would write a 7,000 word article with everything included that takes me days and days and days. And I'm certain that I've done everything right and the keyword is right. And Nick's helped me out with all that. And then I post it and then it just goes on the second page, number 6, and barely any clicks. And that is just the nature of it, unfortunately. So I hope that helped. And I think we are actually coming to the end.
Yeah, I think that's it. We've got no questions.
Yeah, well, any questions we didn't answer, we will try and put as much information in the resources. So stuff like a couple of things you mentioned with the inclusivity toolbar, we'll try and put some links into the resources that will actually help that answer that question, and anything else we think might help. We noted that down, so hopefully that will give you some support. So yeah, I'll wrap up there. Thank you so much, Nick.
Thank you.
And yeah, thanks all for joining. And we have another webinar in 2 weeks, which is on how charities can engage younger generations. So please feel free to join us for that if that's relevant too.